On my wedding day, not a single family member showed up. Not even my father, who promised to walk me down the aisle. They all went for my sister's baby shower. A day later, I posted one picture on Instagram. Less than an hour after that single post, I received 47 missed calls and text messages from them. What could have shaken them so suddenly? They thought they were choosing the winning side in a family rivalry they invented themselves, but they forgot that the game was rigged from the start, just not in the way they assumed. My name is Nina, and for my entire life I've been the understudy to my sister Iris's one-woman show. Our family operates less like a cohesive unit and more like a badly managed hedge fund, with my mother Beatrice as the frantic CEO and Iris as the sole high-risk asset. Iris did everything right according to the unwritten bylaws of our clan. She married a man named Gregory, whose family name Davenport carried the faint musty aroma of generational wealth, even if the reality was closer to generational mortgages. They lived in a house where the hedges were sculpted into anxious spirals and the conversations were just as rigidly controlled. Her life was a carefully staged production, and my family were the financial backers, perpetually applauding and hoping for a return on their emotional investment. I, on the other hand, was the off-book venture they never understood. I chose a different path. I chose Daniel. Daniel doesn't have a surname that gets him preferential tea times. He has hands that are stained with ink and graphite. Hands that bring worlds to life. He's a comic book artist, a storyteller who works from a small sun-drenched studio at the back of our rented cottage, a space that smells of paper and possibility. To me, that scent is the fragrance of creation. To my family, it was the reek of financial instability. They saw his worn jeans and his intense, quiet focus, not as the uniform of a dedicated artist, but as the telltale signs of a man allergic to a real career. They couldn't fathom a life that wasn't benchmarked by promotions and property values. When I announced our engagement, the response was less joyful celebration and more a collective mournful sigh. My mother Beatrice deployed her signature look of pained disappointment, perfected over years of my minor rebellions. "Nina, my dear," she'd lament. "It's lovely that you found someone who shares your creative inclinations, but one cannot frame inclinations and hang them on the wall of a house you can't afford." My sister Iris was more direct, her sympathy as thin and brittle as a sugar glass window. "I just worry about you," she'd coo, inspecting her flawless manicure. "It's a difficult world without a proper foundation." Her foundation was a trust fund that my father refilled with the predictability of a tide every time Gregory's latest investment opportunity turned out to be a financial sinkhole. The ultimate power play was the scheduling. Iris, with a theatrical display of regret she must have rehearsed for weeks, announced her elaborate gender reveal party for the exact same Saturday as my wedding. It was a tactical masterstroke of social warfare, a loyalty test presented as an unfortunate coincidence. And the family, with the lemming-like predictability I'd come to expect, chose. They chose the promise of a Davenport heir and the spectacle of a cannon shooting colored powder over the quiet, solemn vows of a daughter they had long since written off as a lost cause. My father Geoffrey, the man who taught me how to read, had promised me he would be there. "I'll be there to walk you down the aisle, my girl," he'd said, his eyes meeting mine with what I mistook for sincerity. "I'll just have to slip away from the party for an hour or so." He never came. The day of the wedding, my phone became a monument to their united front of indifference. I sat in the small anteroom of the charming ivy-covered chapel we'd booked. A bride in waiting, watching the clock hands creep towards the hour. One by one, the texts arrived, each a perfectly crafted little dagger of polite abandonment. "So sorry, darling. Iris is feeling a bit overwhelmed and needs me," from my mother. "Gregory's parents have cornered us. Impossible to get away," from my aunt. And from my father, the final gutting blow. "Things are really celebratory here. So sorry. Your sister's moment is very important to us all." Each message was a tiny perfect encapsulation of my role in the family. An afterthought, a secondary concern, an obligation to be regretfully cancelled. They weren't just missing my wedding. They were publicly ratifying my irrelevance. The ceremony was set for 4 o'clock. At 10 minutes to, I was staring at my reflection, a bride with no one to present her. That's when Mr. Davies found me. He was our landlord, a retired diplomat who lived in the main house in front of the cottage Daniel and I rented. He had come to the chapel to offer his well wishes and drop off a gift. He found me not in tears but in a state of icy calm, my phone face up on the small table beside me, its screen a damning list of unanswered pleas to mother, father, and Iris. He saw the screen, his gaze taking in the litany of my family's betrayal. He was a man accustomed to observing without commenting, his kind, intelligent eyes missing nothing. He looked at my dress, at my solitary figure, then down at his own impeccably tailored suit. "Nina," he said, his voice imbued with a gentle authority that brooked no argument. "It would be my profound honor, if you would permit me, to escort you." And so I was walked down the aisle, not by the father who forsook me, but by the dignified gentleman who collected our rent. The wedding was intimate, but it was filled with a palpable warmth. Our small circle of friends celebrated with an enthusiasm that filled the void my family had left. Daniel's eyes, full of a love that needed no validation, were all the family I needed in that moment. After the ceremony, as we mingled with our guests, Mr. Davies approached us. "I happened to overhear that a honeymoon was not in the immediate plans," he said, his expression one of gentle inquiry. "We had of course prioritized securing the lease on Daniel's new larger studio space over a vacation. That is a situation that must be rectified," he said with a decisive nod. He took out his phone and made a brief call. "Jonathan," he said, his tone familiar and easy. "Davies here. I'm calling about that young artist I introduced you to, the one who designed the graphic novel adaptation of your grandfather's journals. Well, he has just gotten married." "Yes. A lovely girl, wonderful, my sincerest thanks." He ended the call and turned to us, a twinkle in his eye. "An old friend of mine, Jonathan Parrish, has a private vessel. He insists you make use of it for the next fortnight as his personal wedding gift. His crew is on standby." Jonathan Parrish. The name resonated. A famously private philanthropist and historian. Daniel had taken on a passion project for him, a commission to visually tell the story of Parrish's ancestors' expeditions, a job he'd done for a nominal fee because the story captivated him. He had treated the reclusive tycoon's family history with the same reverence he gave his own characters. And now that reverence was being repaid in a way we could never have imagined. The next day, Daniel and I stood on the deck of a sailing yacht so elegant it looked like it was carved from moonlight, a flute of champagne in my hand, watching the coastline dissolve into a hazy blue line. I took out my phone, captured the moment, and posted a single photograph of Daniel and me, our hands clasped, with the impossible blue of the deep ocean stretching out behind us. The caption was a simple declarative statement. "The adventure begins." The transmission had been sent not as an act of revenge, but as a declaration of independence. My old life had been a supporting role. My new one was the lead. 15 minutes later, my phone's screen became a frantic web of calls and desperate messages. I silenced them all. In the end, there were 417 missed calls and text messages. The first call I chose to answer came 3 days into our voyage, after the barrage of notifications had become a running joke between Daniel and me. It was my mother, Beatrice. I let the phone ring until the last possible moment, a small reclamation of control in a lifetime of acquiescence. When I answered, I remained silent, allowing the vast empty space of the ocean to fill the connection. "Nina, is that you? Nina, for goodness sake, where are you? We have been beside ourselves with worry." The performance was so breathtaking in its dishonesty that it was almost admirable. They weren't worried. They were mystified. They were outraged. They were confronting a narrative they couldn't control, and it was driving them to distraction. "I'm on my honeymoon, Mother," I said, my voice as placid and steady as the horizon. I could hear Iris in the background, her voice a sharp, impatient hiss. "Ask her where she got that boat. Ask her who is paying for it." My mother's tone pivoted instantly from manufactured concern to pointed cross-examination. "A honeymoon on a vessel of that magnitude. Your sister saw the pictures. We are all quite perplexed. Did Daniel's family have resources you failed to mention? It would have been helpful to know. There it was. The frantic scrabbling for a logical foothold, for any explanation that would keep their neatly constructed universe from flying apart. They needed Daniel to be a secret heir, a trust fund kid playing at being a bohemian, because the alternative, that they had made a colossal error in judgment based on their own superficial criteria, was an existential threat. They had to be the victims of my secrecy, not the authors of their own exclusion. This was the pivotal moment, the conversational endgame I had been unknowingly preparing for my entire life. I took a slow sip of my drink, watching a pod of dolphins arc gracefully through the waves. "No, Mother," I said, letting the simple denial expand in the silence. "Daniel doesn't have a hidden fortune. He has something far more valuable, something your world doesn't have a column for in its ledger. Talent, and a reputation for excellence. And those qualities, it turns out, are their own form of currency among people who matter." The silence on the other end was so profound I could almost hear the gears of her mind seizing up. I continued, my voice deliberately light and conversational. "The yacht belongs to a gentleman named Jonathan Parrish. He's one of Daniel's clients. He was so moved by the way Daniel brought his family's history to life that he offered this trip as a personal wedding present. It was all arranged by Mr. Davies." The sound my mother made was a faint strangled noise, like a balloon slowly deflating. Mr. Davies. The landlord. The quiet, polite man they had dismissed as a functional part of the background, like a lamppost or a mailbox. The notion that this man, this figure from the periphery of my supposedly small life, could casually command the favor of a man like Parrish was a paradigm-shifting revelation. It violated the fundamental laws of their social physics. It wasn't about the money you had. It was about the respect you commanded. A concept they had never bothered to learn. "Mr. Davies," she repeated, the name sounding like a word in a foreign language she was struggling to pronounce. "The man who owns your cottage?" "The very same," I confirmed. "The man who graciously stepped in to walk me down the aisle when my own father was otherwise engaged with a cannon full of colored powder. It's remarkable, isn't it? When you consistently treat people with decency and respect, regardless of their perceived net worth, they tend to remember it. You and Father should try it sometime." I could hear Iris in the background, her voice no longer a hiss but a full-blown squawk of indignation. "This is ridiculous. This is a setup. She planned this. She did this deliberately to make us look bad. She did this to humiliate us." I smiled, a real genuine smile. "I have to go now, Mother. The crew has just spotted a migrating whale and I don't want to miss it. Give my best to the family." I disconnected the call before the sputtering could begin, cutting the final thread with a clean, satisfying snip. I turned to Daniel, who was sketching the distant shadow of the whale in his notebook, his focus absolute. For years, my family had made me feel like an apology. They had appraised my husband based on the ink on his fingers, never bothering to read the magnificent stories he told. They saw a quiet man in a simple studio and assumed his world was just as small. They never imagined that this same quiet man was held in high esteem by people whose worlds were so vast they made my family's manicured suburb look like a terrarium. The 417 missed calls were artifacts of their own spectacular folly. Each notification was a digital ghost of a connection they had chosen to sever, a celebration they had snubbed, only to discover it was the only one that mattered. They hadn't just skipped a wedding. They had fundamentally misread the entire map of my life. Standing there, the sea breeze in my hair, I realized the most profound truth of all. By casting me out, they hadn't diminished me. They had inadvertently set me free on a grander ocean than they could ever have conceived.